So I've made a couple videos recently talking about the Sony A7C II and what to expect and what I would like to see from the camera. And judging by a lot of the comments on those videos, some people are excited, some people are content with their original A7C, which makes me happy because the original A7C is still an amazing camera. But since I made those videos, there's been a new plot twist. Sony has announced the ZV-E1, which I think is a really interesting camera because I think to a lot of people, what they want from the A7C II, the ZV-E1 might actually provide for them because it's basically just an A7S III inside of an A7C without the viewfinder. So we will talk about that here in a little bit. Now back to the A7C, because in all honesty, if I did not have this YouTube channel, I probably would not feel the pressure to upgrade to the A7C II as soon as it comes out. So let's talk about it. Should you upgrade from the A7C to the A7C II? Or if you've been thinking about buying the A7C, should you wait and just get the A7C II instead, or even the ZV-E1? So while the A7C II has not been announced yet, we have a pretty good idea of what the camera will be. So we know it will basically be an A7 IV in the A7C body. It will have 10-bit video, a 33 megapixel sensor, and judging from what we've seen from the ZV-E1, it will probably have the AI autofocus that the A7R5 and the ZV-E1 now have, which is a pretty big deal if you photograph a lot of people. So should you wait for this camera? I think there's a couple different answers for a couple different scenarios. So we're going to split this into three groups. Group 1 being if you use this camera primarily for taking photos. Group 2, you want this camera mostly for shooting video. In Group 3, where you need a hybrid camera that excels in taking photos and video. For the people who are like me and primarily use this camera for taking photos, you're probably better off sticking with the original A7C if you already own it. From what we know, the only real upgrade in terms of taking photos, besides the autofocus, which is already really good on the A7C, is that upgrade from a 24 megapixel sensor to a 33 megapixel sensor. And while that 30-40% jump in megapixels sounds like a lot, it really doesn't make as much of a difference in terms of photos as you might think. Now, I do own both cameras, so don't get me wrong, it is nice. But I don't think it's a big enough jump that makes it worth buying a new camera, maybe if it was like 40 or 50 megapixels, but not going from 24 to 33. So in terms of photos, I think that one deciding factor isn't the megapixel size, but it is if you want that AI autofocus, which personally for me, I don't photograph people enough, but when I do, the autofocus on the A7C is already more than good enough. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. In Group 2, for the people who are primarily wanting this camera for shooting video, this is where the answer is a little bit more tricky because a week ago, I would have said you're better off waiting for the A7C II, but now you're probably better off just buying the ZV-E1. The ZV-E1 is going to be sold for around $2,200 in the US, which is what I predict that the A7C II will be priced around roughly about the same as well. So what exactly makes the video better on the A7C II or the ZV-E1 compared to the original A7C? As someone who shoots a lot of photo and video, there's a couple reasons I would personally wait for the A7C II rather than get the A7C for video. The first being the fact that the video codec is 10-bit, which makes everything easier. It's easier to expose because you can reliably shoot an S-Log3 when S-Log3 is terrible on the A7C, the A7 III, basically all 8-bit cameras. It's easy to color grade because it doesn't fall apart as soon as you apply a LUT or do any kind of tweaking to the saturation. And the final product just kind of simply looks better. I can always tell when someone is shooting on an 8-bit camera because the blacks always look washed out and video footage just looks crisp on a 10-bit camera, regardless of the resolution. The second thing is you can shoot in 4K 60, which probably will be cropped, but not on the ZV-E1, which will also be getting 4K 120 later on down the road. For me personally, when I film weddings, I am mainly using my FX3, which I am filming this video with, as a handheld camera, which I do a more documentary-esque style of shooting for most of the day, and then some B-roll throughout the day. I will have a camera on a gimbal, and that is almost always my A7 IV. Cropped 4K 60 is really not that bad, because you can just throw a 20mm 1.8 on there. With the crop, it becomes essentially a 30mm 1.8, which I think personally is kind of that perfect focal length for getting any kind of B-roll footage. And it's not too tight and it's not too wide. And the third thing being active stabilization, which makes handheld footage look so good because you don't really notice micro jitters anymore. It eliminates all of those. And the ZV-E1 also has an improved active stabilization, which crops it in even more, but you get an almost like purely gimbal-like smoothness to the video. And the third category, which I think is where most people will probably fall into, is you want a hybrid camera that you can use for both photo and video, and you know it's going to perform well and you know it's going to be great. If you want a new camera that will last for years and still be able to compete with new cameras coming out 3-4 years from now, you definitely want to wait for the A7C II, because the original A7C is running on 5-6-year-old hardware at this point. So if you're trying to do professional photo and video work, wait for the A7C II. But if you just want to take photos and video for social media, say you have a following, maybe you're an influencer or whatever, you're probably better off just getting the ZV-E1, because you don't need the high resolution photos that the A7C II will offer. And you essentially have all the video specs you could ever need. Although personally, if I was in that situation, I would probably still go with the A7C II, because I really don't find uncropped 4K 60 to be that important, and I don't care about 4K 120. And having that option to take higher resolution photos is always nice to have. So that's personally my take as someone who does photography and video production professionally. That is the advice I would recommend for most people. In all honesty, I think everyone that already has an A7C will continue to be happy with that camera if they don't upgrade, and I would not stress and worry about it if I were you. The most important thing is that you don't fall victim to gas. Gear acquisition syndrome. The reality is, upgrading cameras will not make your photos any better. It will not make your videos any better. Just focus on your craft and your creativity, and you will only be limited by yourself. And hey, when it's time to upgrade at that point, you'll just know. If anything, instead of spending money on upgrading cameras, buy a new lens or two. That will make a bigger difference in your work. But hey, I love making videos about the A7C, so when the A7C II comes out, it's only a matter of time and I will be making videos about it. But if you don't think you fit into one of the groups I mentioned in this video, feel free to drop a comment. I'll see what I can do to help you out, along with the other kind of people which are typically in my comments offering help and advice as well. And with that, thank you for watching the video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to help support me so I can continue growing and reaching a larger audience. I hope I could help inspire you to take more photos. Go out and shoot.